And the negotiations on raising the debt ceiling and the federal budget continue. Congressional leaders and the president meet again today. That's at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll continue to monitor the talks. Now, here's the Senate on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in troubled times, we need you during this season of challenge. Our lawmakers need your presence to help them build bridges that will keep our nation strong and to forge alliances that will glorify you. Filled with your wisdom, may our senators find solutions to the complex problems we face. With gratitude for all the blessings and benefits you generously bestow, help us to reveal our appreciation by living with honor. Keep us from taking for granted the faithful service of the many unsung heroes and heroines who support our senators, and reward them for their willingness to make daily sacrifices for liberty. During this time of armed conflict, we also pray for our courageous men and women in harm's way. We lift this prayer in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 13, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1323, which is a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit. The 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled. The filing deadline for all secondary amendments to S. 1323 is 10 a.m. this morning. At approximately 10:40, there will be up to 2 roll call votes. The first will be on the motion to invoke cloture on S. 1323, piece of legislation I just spoke about. The second roll call vote will be on a motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to the Military Construction, Veteran Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriation Bill. Madam President, sometimes it's been very hard to find common ground in Washington. But there's one thing in which Republicans and Democrats agree. It's absolutely necessary that Congress prevent a catastrophic default on the nation's debt that would put our economy at grave risk. I've said it, so have my Republican colleagues. The business community is shouting now very loudly the same thing. This week, business leaders wrote to Congress, in fact, it was yesterday, the White House asked us to put our differences aside and avert a default crisis before it's too late. Literally hundreds of CEOs, including executives from the nation's largest companies and the most respected business groups, signed the letter. More than 300, Madam President. They wrote, "This is a risk our country must not take." They said if we don't reach a deal soon, the stock market will be in disarray. We all know that. We all know that we can't afford to have our country crash. Our economy is already struggling to stay on course to recovery. The United States Chamber of Commerce President Tom Donahue, who signed the letter, also said earlier this week that a default would have, quote, dire consequences for our economy, our markets, and Main Street Americans, end of quote. Business leaders then, Madam President, are begging us to do the right thing and to do it quickly. That's why I was shocked to hear the Speaker of the House say yesterday that averting a default crisis was President Obama's problem, not his. That's not what he said a few months ago when he urged us to deal like adults with the problem. And it wasn't what he said when he voted to raise the debt ceiling 7 times while George W. Bush was president, increasing the debt limit by $4 trillion. In fact, when the Speaker voted to increase the debt limit by nearly $1 trillion one time alone in 2003, he didn't demand it to be accompanied by massive spending cuts or any spending cuts. Instead, a Republican Congress approved hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts for the wealthy, which contributed to our massive debt, and they were all on borrowed money. All those massive tax cuts that people received around the country were on America's credit card that's now come due. Congress has raised the debt limit 89 times since it was created in 1939. 54 times was Republican presidents. 35 times under Democratic presidents. Ronald Reagan asked Congress to raise the limit 18 times, and we raised it. Twice as many as any other president. Republicans never claimed then that the issue was the president's problem. For Republicans to claim now that the deficit is a problem only for the president or Democrats in Congress is irresponsible. It's even more irresponsible considering President Bush, with the help of Republicans here in Congress, doubled the debt while he was president. That's more debt accumulated than any president in history by far. The problem belongs to all of us in Congress. It'll take all of us working together, political party aside, to make a deal possible. This is not money being borrowed to spend more money. It's money that we have to raise the debt so that we can pay the bills we already have accrued. Democrats realize finding common ground isn't always easy. If it were, we would have hammered out an agreement a long time ago. But reducing the deficit and getting our fiscal house in order is too important to quit when the going gets tough. Theodore Hesburgh, the famous president of the University of Notre Dame, who was president for 35 years, said, "This is about making difficult decisions." Quote, "You don't make decisions because they're easy. You don't make them because they're cheap. You don't make them because they're popular. You make them because they're right." End of quote. It's time for Democrats and Republicans to get together to do what's right for our nation. We simply cannot allow our country to fail to pay its bills for the first time in its history. I'm confident we'll find a way to get this done. The risks to our economy are too great not to. I was happy to hear yesterday, I received a phone call from the Republican leader at 12:30 yesterday. He's come forward with a proposal to address the debt limit. I'm studying it and discussing it with my senators. I have another meeting at 11 o'clock. He spent a great deal of time working on this. Senator McConnell did. I commend him for his thoughtful and unique proposal. It's something that we have to look at very closely. I'm heartened by what I read. This is a serious proposal, and I commend the Republican leader for coming forward. But I believe that the Republican leader's proposal, combined with ideas he and I have been discussing, to force a vote on deficit reduction proposals, could go a long way toward resolving the impasse we now find ourselves. We both agreed a long time ago that the problem is not the president's, it's our problem. It's every American's problem, and certainly it's a problem for every member of Congress. In the meantime, this afternoon, congressional leaders will again meet with President Obama and his senior advisors to try to advance our discussions. Democrats realize finding common ground isn't always easy. As I said before, if it were, we've hammered out an agreement a long time ago. But I say again, that reducing the deficit and getting our fiscal house in order is too important to quit when the going gets tough. I'm confident that somehow, some way, we'll find a way to get this done. Can't allow our country, for the first time in its history, to fail to pay its bills. The risks to our economy are far too great not to. In that letter we received yesterday, American business leaders said it very well. Quote, "Now is the time for our political leaders to put aside partisan differences and act in the nation's best interest. It's time to pull together rather than pull apart," end of quote. So I urge my Republican colleagues to remember this. We're not opponents scoring off across a baseball diamond or some playing field. We're on the same team with the same goal in mind. But let's take, for example, the baseball team that I just talked about. If the catcher doesn't show up or refuses to play, it doesn't matter how good the pitcher is. It doesn't matter how good his curve is, how fast he can throw that ball. The team doesn't stand a chance without a catcher. You need a team to accomplish the goals of a baseball team. You need a team to accomplish the goals that this Congress has. It's time each and every one of us here in Congress remembered that. In the words of American business leaders, it's time to pull together rather than apart. Madam President, would you announce morning business?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-1323, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 93, S-1323, a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit.
Under the previous order, there will be 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Madam President.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I rise to speak in morning business. Madam President, I want to thank my colleague, the Democratic Majority Leader, for his opening remarks. He and I have been given an assignment of going to the White House each day to sit down with the leaders, Democratic and Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, and the President, Vice President, Secretary of the Treasury, and leaders in the President's staff to deal with this pending crisis over the debt ceiling limit. On August 2nd, we are required to extend the debt ceiling of the United States of America. It is an interesting exercise which usually goes unnoticed. Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico presented to us yesterday a history of the debt ceiling, and I was glad to learn a little bit more. In 1939, we passed a law which said we could extend the debt ceiling of the United States as needed rather than have congressional approval of every bond issued by the government of the United States. It made it a much more efficient way for the government to operate. As Senator Reid said earlier, since 1939 we have extended the debt ceiling 89 times. And most every occasion it's gone unnoticed because the United States has quickly extended its debt ceiling and kept its credit rating in the eyes of the world because of our timeliness. There was only one exception, a technical lapse that led to perhaps an increase in cost of government for just a brief time, but by and large, on 88 occasions, this was done without any fanfare or notice. It is interesting to look at the presidents who extended the debt ceiling. The all-time record breaker when it comes to extending the debt ceiling was Ronald Reagan, who extended the debt ceiling 18 times in the matter of 8 years. So more than twice a year, Congress was extending the debt ceiling as our national debt increased dramatically under President Reagan. The same thing happened under President Bush. He holds the record, second highest record, I believe, with 8 or 9 extensions of the debt in his 8-year tenure as president. In both occasions, under President Reagan and President George W. Bush, the debt of the United States increased dramatically. As Senator Reid said earlier, under President George W. Bush, the debt of the United States of America in 8 years nearly doubled. In fact, some say it more than doubled. This was a period of time when we were doing things that frankly cost us a lot of money in terms of our national expenditures. President George W. Bush waged 2 wars without paying for them. When you do that, of course, the cost of the war is added to your nation's debt. President George W. Bush also did something no president had ever done. He cut taxes on American taxpayers in the midst of a war. Most presidents understand you have to do just the opposite. You've got to raise more money to wage a war because you have the ordinary costs of government that have to be met as well. And so the idea of cutting taxes in the midst of a war added even more to the deficit under President George W. Bush. And then he had this theory that there were major programs that we could enact and not pay for, like Medicare Prescription Part D. All of these things accumulated together with the basic philosophy of the Republican Party that if you just keep cutting taxes, the economy will get well. It didn't happen. Just the opposite occurred. When President George W. Bush took office, our nation's budget was in surplus. When he left office, it faced the largest deficit in its history. Instead of giving President Obama a positive economy, when President Obama was sworn in as president, we were losing hundreds of thousands of jobs each month. Now we face a deadline, August 2nd, on whether we extend the debt ceiling. I see the Republican leader has come to the floor, and I commend him for what I consider to be a positive and thoughtful response. He understands, as most all of us do, that extending the debt ceiling is essential for the economy of the United States and for our recovery from this recession. I asked my staff what would happen if we defaulted on our debt ceiling and didn't pay, and interest rates went up 1%. 1%. They are around 2.8, 2.9% now. What if interest rates went up 1% because of this self-inflicted wound of failure to extend the debt ceiling? And the consequences are real, not just for the government, but for families and businesses across America. 1% increase in the interest rate if we would default and not extend our debt ceiling. Here's what the Third Way reports. Treasury rates, if it increased 1%, would cause deficits to increase $20 billion in the first year and by $150 billion in the out years. In other words, the debt of the United States would increase by a dramatic amount. Increased Treasury rates would cause the gross domestic product, that's the economic activity of America, the sum total of our goods and services, to decrease by 1%. According to J.P. Morgan. That would cause the U.S. economy to lose 640,000 jobs. At a time when we are losing jobs in the public sector but gaining them in the private sector, the failure to extend the debt ceiling would in fact increase unemployment in America. J.P. Morgan predicts that that 1% increase would cause a stock market loss of 9%. What does that mean to the savings and 401k plans of American families? That they'd lose on average $8,816, something no family would like to see. And raising mortgage rates by 1% would cause the typical mortgage to increase by somewhere in the range of $38,000. $38,000 in payments that need to be made. So why would we inflict this wound on ourselves? As we sit with the President and try to find our way through this crisis, we should understand that, as the business leaders reported to us yesterday, this would be a disaster, a self-imposed disaster, a failure of political leadership. The President has called us together, and he has said, you're going to meet every single day until we get it done. That determination by the President is keeping us at the table and focusing us on the mission at hand. I will tell you that I believe we can reduce this deficit if we are honest about the spending in Washington, to focus only on domestic discretionary spending, a part of the budget that has not increased in real dollar terms in the last 10 years, and to ignore the costs that are growing on the security side, the defense side, as well as the cost of entitlement programs, is not only being blinded to reality, it really means that the cuts that are made in domestic discretionary are outrageously deep. What we need to do, what the Bowles-Simpson Commission told us needed to be done, was painful but necessary. Put everything on the table. Everything on the table. That means all spending all entitlements and revenue. I find it hard to understand the Republican position that says we can impose new obligations on the families of children going to college to pay more for student loans, but we cannot impose any additional burden on the wealthiest people in America to pay more in taxes. To think that the George Bush tax cuts means for a person making $1 million in income each year, that's $20,000 a week in income, to think that that George Bush tax cut is worth $200,000 a year in tax cuts for a millionaire, and that we would blithely hear from the other side we should allow that to continue while asking everyone else in America to sacrifice, is upside down. It is instructive to me that when asked, people across America believe that we should put everything on the table, including taxes and revenue. We can do this. The argument that this is the wrong time to raise taxes on anybody because the state of the economy is not borne out by history. Whenever taxes have been increased in recent times, we have seen the opposite occur. If they are increased in a thoughtful way, not imposed on working and middle-income families and lower-income groups, in fact, we've seen in the past that the economy has grown. It hasn't stopped us from growing. We now have a top income tax rate of 35%. When it was over 39% under President Clinton, we had the fastest and most dynamic growth in modern time in our economy. There is no linkage between taxes on the wealthy and the growth of our economy other than the exact opposite of the Republican argument. Where taxes have been raised on higher income groups, we've actually seen our economy expand time and time and time again. So I would hope that we would have a balanced approach to dealing with this deficit, put everything on the table, and I would hope that as we meet with the President that we get the job done, and we ought to do it soon. The longer we wait, the more uncertainty is not good for our economy in a world where we have a volatile economic situation, particularly in Europe. It is not good for job growth, where we know we desperately need to create more good-paying jobs right here in America. And it is certainly not good for our reputation in Congress. We were elected to lead, to make hard decisions. We have that opportunity, and we need to do it now. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Yesterday morning, I came to the floor to announce my conclusion that despite his repeated claims to the contrary, the President has no real intention of cutting spending or dealing with deficits and debt. It's been my fervent hope that the President could be persuaded to view the upcoming debt limit vote as an opportunity to change direction, to cut spending, to cut debt, and to preserve entitlement programs. But those hopes have evaporated as the President began to insist in recent weeks that he would only consider spending cuts later if Republicans agreed now to one of the biggest tax hikes in history. Republicans refused to be drawn into this legislative trap. And when Democrats proposed a smaller plan that they claimed without any details amounted to more than $1 trillion in cuts, we refused to go along again because we knew that it really didn't cut $1 trillion. We refused to pretend that a bad idea was a good one. Our bottom line is this: the White House would have to prove that the cuts it was claiming to support were real and enforceable before Republicans would sign off on any plan to endorse them. As it turned out, our skepticism was well-founded. Earlier this week, I asked an administration official point blank what the cuts they were proposing as part of their so-called bipartisan deal would amount to next year. That's year 2012. Said they were talking about a $2 billion reduction, for next year. And we'll borrow more than $4 billion today. That, Mr. President, Madam President, is not a deal that I'm particularly interested in. This is what we've been planning to spend. It's more than $1 trillion over 10 years. It was at that point that I realized the White House simply was not serious about cutting spending or debt. The only thing they were serious about was putting together a plan that appeared serious but really wasn't. And they wanted Republicans to go along with it. Well, we're not interested in playing that game. In the end, the White House gave us three choices in exchange for a vote to increase the debt limit: a massive tax hike, smoke and mirrors, or default. And none of these options is acceptable. So yesterday I proposed a possible fourth option. As a last resort, if the President continues to shirk his duty to do something about our dire fiscal situation. If the White House continues to insist on either tax hikes or default, then we'll send legislation to the President that requires him to propose spending cuts greater than the debt limit he requests. Make the President show in black and white the specific cuts he claims to support. If he refuses, he'll have to raise the debt ceiling on his own. But he's not going to get Republicans to go along with that. That way the President can't pretend to support cuts when he doesn't. He's forced to simply put up. Now, I understand the reluctance the American people have in concluding that a serious solution isn't going to happen. I hope I'm wrong. The idea of not doing something serious about the debt before August, frankly, sickens me. Like most Americans, I previously didn't believe anyone in this country could seriously deny the need to rein in government spending. Like most Americans, I previously didn't believe anyone could be so short-sighted as to propose massive tax hikes in a weakened economy. Like all of you, I didn't think even the most liberal among us would go to such lengths to protect the expansion of government. I'm sorry to report there are people who believe all of those things, and they currently reside right down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But Republicans refuse to let the President use the threat of a debt limit deadline to get us to cave on tax increases or on phony spending cuts that future Congresses could just as easily reverse with a single vote. We're not gambling our nation's fiscal future on the promise of spending cuts tomorrow for tax hikes today. So it's time to change the conversation altogether. It's time to refocus this debate on the kind of real cuts and debt reduction Americans are demanding of us. It's time to show there are two different versions about our nation's future at work here. So over the next several days, Republicans will redouble our efforts to avoid all four scenarios. Americans don't want tax hikes. They don't want phony spending cuts. They don't want a debt disapproval plan. And they don't want us to default on our debts. They want real cuts and real reforms now. And that's what Republicans will spend the next 2 weeks fighting for, the one thing that will ensure that Washington gets its house in order and forces future Congresses to live within their means. The time has come for a balanced budget amendment that forces Washington to balance its books. If these debt negotiations have convinced us of anything, it's that we can't leave it to politicians in Washington to make the difficult decisions they need to get our fiscal house in order. The balanced budget amendment will do that for them. Now is the moment. No more games, no more gimmicks. The Constitution must be amended to keep the government in check. We've tried persuasion. We've tried negotiations. We've tried elections. Nothing has worked. If the President won't do something about the debt, we'll go around him and take it to the American people. We'll have a real debate. Those who support endless spending and debt will vote against it. It's time we all stand up to be counted. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Alabama.
I thank the Republican leader for his efforts in this regard. I know for a fact that Senator McConnell and the leadership on our side hoped and believed it was possible to have take advantage of the opportunity of the discussion over raising the debt limit to create a major alteration in our plan of spending in this country, and it's been disappointing to not have been met halfway in that regard. And knowing the numbers as I do as ranking member of the Budget Committee, when Senator McConnell was told that the plan proposed by the White House included only a $2 billion cut next year in spending, it's just a stunning thing, since our debt this year, when we end the fiscal year September 30th, will have added $1,500 billion to our debt in 1 year. We're going to save $2 next year. This is not acceptable, and I'm disappointed, and I appreciate the majority leader's efforts in that regard. I would note, the discussion about the war as causing our deficit. It has been expensive over 10 years. The war on terrorism, Iraq and Afghanistan together have cost about $1,500 billion. Next year, we're projecting a little over $100 billion to say. So the amount of the deficit this 1 year will equal the cost of the Afghan and Iraq wars over 10 years. The deficit this year is $1,500 billion. The cost of the war this year is about $150 billion. So it's about 10% of the deficit we're running this year. So although it's real, and we hope to bring those numbers down, and already projecting next year those numbers to come down to closer to $100 billion from $150, still the cause of our deficit is not the war. It represents about 10% of the total deficit we are running this year. That's just the fact. That's what the numbers show. Madam President, one of the few things mandated for Congress to do every year is to pass a budget. According to the Congressional Budget Act contained in the United States Code, signed into law in 1974, the Senate Budget Committee must produce a budget resolution by April 1st, adopt a conference agreement on that budget by April 15th. Furthermore, a budget must include total levels of spending, expected revenue, and deficits for no less than 5 years, and frequently we do 10-year budgets. Once a budget is in place, Congress is prohibited from passing legislation with spending that exceeds the levels that were in the budget, sort of like we do in our home. In essence, a budget is both a concrete plan for the future and an enforcement mechanism to help us stay within the limits we set and to ensure honest accounting. One of these enforcement mechanisms in the Budget Act, as set forth in the Code, is a prohibition against the consideration of any appropriation bills in the absence of a budget. We shouldn't move forward with spending bills until we've established a budget. How simple is that? That's why we're supposed to have done it by April 15th, because the appropriations bills come along afterwards. This is the essence of good government. You should not spend taxpayers' dollars without a plan for how to efficiently allocate the dollars and in a way that maximizes the effectiveness of our spending and minimizes waste and abuse and fraud. We have too much of that in our government. This point of order, and there is a point of order in the Code contained in Section 303 (c) of the Congressional Budget Act. Once that point of order is raised, the legislation in question cannot move forward unless a majority of the senators vote to waive the budget requirement. The taxpayer money should not be appropriated without a budget, without a plan. This is what the law dictates. This is our responsibility, I believe, as legislators and as senators. This is what the organizational structure of this very Senate requires. And this is the duty that the Democrat-led Senate has refused to fulfill for 805 days. Senate Democrats have failed to adopt a budget in more than 2 years, and this year have refused to even produce a budget for public review. They claim they have one. They claim that it does some good things, and they leak portions of it to the public and spin it as being a positive document. But when asked to produce it, they don't do so. When asked to have hearings on it, they don't do so? If they're proud of it, if it'll sustain public scrutiny, why don't they bring it forward? I've never imagined that I would serve 2 years in the Senate, now be ranking member of the Budget Committee, and we wouldn't have a budget even presented. So as soon as today, we're scheduled now to vote on a motion to proceed to the Military Construction Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2012, beginning October 1st of this year. Regardless of my feelings about the legislation or my high admiration for those who've worked on it, I think I have a responsibility, a duty, as ranking member of the Budget Committee during this time of extreme fiscal danger, the greatest debt we've ever seen, to oppose cloture on this measure and to raise the 303C point of order should cloture be invoked. My objection does not mean I don't support the bill, and to any who would suggest otherwise, let me state that this action is at its core a defense of our men and women in uniform. No one understands duty better than those who wear the uniform, and it is our duty to write a budget that sets priorities and ensures the needs of our troops are met. The military is a priority of the highest order. To protect that priority, we must have a budget, especially in these challenging economic times. The Senate has failed those in uniform if it chooses political expedience over drafting a budget that includes a military spending plan. How can we protect the military from unwise cuts if spending plans aren't even made public? The only area of government significantly cut in the unseen Democratic budget proposal that I have referred to previously, that I've called the phantom budget, appears to be the Pentagon. If you take the numbers that were leaked from their budget plan, it calls for $900 billion in cuts to the Pentagon, to the government, to the military. Well, if this is their plan, we ought to know it. So I just don't want to hear people say that you're objecting to the military construction bill because you don't appreciate the military, while the Democratic majority who are producing this military construction bill claim they have a budget that hammers the Defense Department by $900 billion. Indeed, while that appears to be the plan, the budget submitted by President Obama earlier this year, not one produced by the Senate Democrats, but the President's own budget, calls for a 9.5% increase in the Energy Department, a 10.5% increase for the Education Department, a 10.5% increase for the State Department, and 60% increase for high-speed rail and the transportation budget, without money to fund it. So while they're proposing major cuts in defense, we've got major plans on the table to increase spending next year when we again are going to run a $1 trillion-plus deficit. The authors of the Congressional Budget Act likely did not contemplate a future in which the governing party believes budgets are no longer necessary, as seems to be the case today. That's why I'm also bringing forward legislation that will raise the 303C point of order threshold to 60 votes. No appropriations without a budget unless 60 senators choose to waive that requirement. That's in law. We sometimes put requirements in law. We don't have very good enforcement mechanisms. The danger we face from continuing to operate this government without a clear, concrete budget is simply too great. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned our nation's debt is the gravest of all national security threats we face. It is so. We are reaching a point where our economy could enter into a financial crisis as a result of our national debt. We owe it to the extraordinary men and women who serve this country to defend at home the way of life they have defended abroad. And that means the Senate must confront the debt problem that threatens us with economic disaster. Already, as economists Rogoff and Reinhart demonstrated, we are losing at least 1 million jobs a year as a result of the high debt we have run up. Now 95% of our economy, 95% of GDP, soon to be 100% of GDP. In just a little over 2 months, our nation's gross debt will be as large as our entire economy and growing larger. This year we'll take in $2.2 trillion, but we'll spend $3.7 trillion. By the end of the first 3 years of the Obama administration, we will have accumulated $5 trillion in gross debt, new debt. Over the next 10 years, we are projected to spend $46 trillion, adding another $13 trillion to our national debt. That's $13,000 billion. The President proposes saving $2 billion next year. He proposes we increase tax on corporate jets that over 10 years would save $3 billion, while he has a budget submitted to the Senate that would increase the debt by $13,000 billion over the next 10 years. I don't defend corporate jets. We can eliminate that, as far as I'm concerned, and change our whole tax structure, which needs simplifying and more integrity and more effectiveness in it. But that's not a responsible way for a leader to suggest we're going to fix our debt problem by changing the corporate tax rate for jets. No nation can sustain this level of debt, nor can any nation ever raise enough taxes to cover this level of spending. The course we are on is not merely unsustainable, it's unimaginable. American people have every right to be angry with their Congress. We're sitting here running a government and borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. They should be furious with us. It's unacceptable. It's unexplainable. We spend and borrow all we can. That's the fact. There's only one sound answer: control spending and grow the economy, not tax it into submission. For Americans to regain prosperity, Washington must regain discipline. Hiking taxes to bail out the Washington spenders who have put us in debt by increasing domestic non-defense spending in the last 2 years, not war, not Social Security. I'm talking about general expenditures of our government have gone up 24% in the last 2 years. They've run up huge, huge debts. And now they want the American people to pay more so they can continue to spend at this irresponsible level. I say no to that. I'm not for that. Since the Democrat-led Senate has last passed a budget, we have spent $7.3 trillion and increased the debt by $3.2 trillion. When President Obama took office, the public debt of the United States was about $5.7 trillion. In 3 years, we've added in 3 years, we've added about close to $4 trillion in debt. And in 4 years, President Obama's debt that he would have run up at this rate will be larger than the debt that's been accumulated in the entire history of America. We're on an unsustainable course. This fiscal abandon has brought us to the brink of debt, the debt ceiling that we have. We have a limit on how much debt you can run up statutorily, and yet still the Senate Democrats will not produce a budget, and the White House will not put together an honest plan with real spending cuts that they'll stand behind and let people analyze and score. Just more gimmicks, tricks, and games. That is not acceptable. That's why we're in this fix today. Majority Leader Reid actually declared it would be foolish to have a budget. Foolish to have a budget. Would you tell a family who's having difficulty with their finances it's foolish to have a budget? Would you declare to a family who's running up credit card debts that 40% of what they're spending is put on a credit card every month, that they should not have a budget? When the United States Code requires us to have a budget by April 15th? It's easy to claim deficit reduction as a priority, but if our leaders were actually to put a plan on paper, it would become all too clear that their real desire is for larger taxes and only meager cuts to spending. That's the truth. That won't get the job done. Numbers don't lie. Their rhetoric creates the appearance of savings, but those savings really don't exist when you look at the numbers carefully. But while the White House and Senate Democrats may think their strategy is clever, I don't think the American people should be amused. I don't think the American people are amused. Until the majority who asked for the responsibility to lead this Senate, that's what they wanted, they've got it. Until they allow this chamber to adopt a badly needed budget, I'm going to continue raising points of order on appropriations bills. Now more than ever, we should fulfill our legal duties, not shirk them. More than ever today we should. We were not elected to preside over the financial decline of this country. We were not elected to shut down the committees, deny them the right to function, to shut down debate, or cede our constitutional responsibility to secret meetings and closed-door proceedings. The debt limit is not only about fulfilling our obligations to creditors, it's about fulfilling our obligation to the whole people that we serve, good Americans. We owe them a Senate that works openly and tirelessly on their behalf, who cast votes on these important matters and has to respond and hold accountability to the American people. So we owe the people an honest, competent, limited, efficient government. We owe them a Senate that is worthy of their faith and trust. We're not there. We're not fulfilling that responsibility, and therefore I expect that I will object and raise a budget point of order against the movement to the military construction bill. I thank the chair and would yield the floor.
President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I want to echo some of the remarks that were made by my colleague from Alabama regarding a budget. He is the ranking Republican, the ranking member on our side on the Senate Budget Committee. I serve as a member of that committee. And it's ironic, I think, that we are on the floor of the Senate this week, as we were last week, debating a non-binding sense of the Senate resolution that states, and I quote, "Those earning $1 million or more per year make a more meaningful contribution to the deficit reduction effort," end quote. Doesn't specify what that is, doesn't say if it should be tax increases or spending cuts that should have an impact on these high-income earners. But I would echo what was stated by my colleague from Alabama, and that is, this is no substitute for a budget. Congress's job is to pass a budget. That's what we're here for. That's why the people, the taxpayers of this country elect us, is to set priorities, is to come here and make decisions about where we're going to allocate their hard-earned tax dollars. We haven't had a budget. Democrats have not put a budget on this floor, haven't passed a budget for 805 days. 805 days. Now, this sense of the Senate resolution, which is vague and ambiguous and meaningless, doesn't do anything to address the fiscal challenges that our country faces or to achieve any level of budgetary savings.
Madam President, will the Senator yield for a question?
I'd be happy to yield.
Senator Thune, you are an experienced member of the Budget Committee and a member of the leadership on the Republican side in the Senate. Isn't it true we had more interest in members wanting to join the Budget Committee this year, particularly the new members who had gotten elected, who had talked to their constituents about their fear of America's debt, and they wanted to be on the Budget Committee, and only a few could be selected out of the group that wanted to be on. And What's been your observation as to how they've reacted to the fact that no budget has been presented? The committee never met or even marked up and had hearings as the U.S. Code requires. Maybe you could share with them how they felt about that.
Well, and I would say, Madam President, to my colleague from Alabama, he's absolutely right. There was tremendous interest this year because really, if you look at the last election, the 2010 election, a lot of the people who were elected, new members both in the House and the Senate, were elected because they ran on a message to their constituents of getting America's fiscal house in order, getting spending and debt under control. Where does that start? It starts with a budget. And so they got here, and a lot of them tried to get on your committee, on the Senate Budget Committee, and we have all these bright new members of the United States Senate who have a lot to contribute, who have had no opportunity to do that because we haven't had a budget. We haven't had a markup. We haven't done any of the things that are necessary in order to move the budget process forward. And so I am completely in agreement with the senator from Alabama when it comes to what the priority should be around here. It ought to be doing a budget that actually focuses on cutting spending and getting this debt under control. I'd try to offer an amendment to this non-binding sense of the Senate resolution. Unfortunately, the majority leaders blocked any amendments from being considered to this measure. But basically, it would cut all non-security discretionary spending for the current fiscal year by 2.5%. Now, a nominal amount. I recognize that, okay? It's not a big spending cut. It is a small haircut. And it's not going to solve our problems. It produces about $11 billion in savings from some of these accounts that have seen, as the senator from Alabama noted, extraordinary growth since 2008. Spending has increased in the discretionary part of the budget by 24% in 2 years, in a 2-year time period when inflation in the overall economy was about 2%. So the government was spending at a rate that was 10 or 12 times the rate of inflation. Absolutely unsustainable. You can't not argue to the American people with a straight face that that's the kind of spending that ought to be going on here in Washington, D.C. Now, because the amendments have been blocked, we're probably not going to get a chance to vote on that. But it is a simple, straightforward thing, just to say let's cut by 2.5% the discretionary spending, given the fact that it's increased by 24% in the last 2 years. Now, these accounts started to feel a little bit of downward pressure when the continuing resolution passed earlier this year, but a lot more needs to be done because we need to be putting pressure on the spending side of the equation, not the tax side. And all of my Republican colleagues have said it multiple times, but I think it bears repeating and explaining that our problem in Washington isn't that Washington taxes too little, it is that it spends too much. And that's true. Revenues are below their historical average, but spending is dramatically higher than its historical average. And the reason we've got, revenues that are lower than the historical average is because we've got an anemic recovery, economic recovery. If we get the economy growing again and expanding and creating jobs, we'll start to see some of the tax revenue pick up. But just as a point of fact, in 2006 and 2007, we had a very similar income tax system to what we have today. It's very similar to the current system. And at that time, it raised more revenue than our historical average. Our historical average of around 18% of our entire economy is what we raise in tax revenues in any typical year. That's the historical average. Well, in 2006 and 2007, where in the income tax code the rates are very similar to what we have today, we exceeded the historical average. So the issue is not that we have too little revenue here in Washington. It's not that Washington taxes too little. It's that Washington spends too much. Once the economy starts to turn around, we know we're going to be raising a substantial and sufficient amount of revenue without having to resort to tax increases. In fact, if we were to enact tax reform that was revenue neutral, and by that I mean that doesn't generate more revenue for Washington to spend, but if we were to lower the rates on people and businesses in this country and broaden the tax base, our economy would grow and expand dramatically. And we'd see, I think, even more revenue generated for the federal government and certainly more jobs created, which is what everybody in this country wants to see. We should not, however, Madam President, simply be increasing taxes to pay for an ever-increasing spending for programs that aren't sustainable. This year, federal government spending will comprise 24.3% of our nation's entire economic output. So almost a quarter of every dollar spent in this country will be spent by the federal government. Now, that doesn't take into consideration spending by state and local governments, but it's 18% more than our historical average. Historically, in this country, we spent about 20.6% of our entire economy on the federal government. Today, this year, 24.3%. We're almost at a quarter out of every dollar being spent by our federal government here in Washington, D.C. What happens? Well, that means that there's less activity out there in the private economy, which is where the real jobs are created. And when the federal government is spending this much and borrowing this much, it crowds out private investment, makes it more difficult for the private economy to get out there and to create jobs that are actually permanent, good-paying jobs for the people in this country. Now, perhaps an even more pertinent statistic is the years in which our budget has been balanced since 1969. These budgets were balanced because spending was constrained. If you look at the 5 years when the budget was balanced, the federal government spending in those years comprised just under 18.7% of our GDP, of our economic output. And so if you look at the problem that we're trying to diagnose in this country, our colleagues on the other side diagnose it as a revenue problem. But I would submit, Madam President, that the problem that we are trying to solve is a spending problem fundamentally. The 5 times when the budget was balanced since 1969, in every instance, in every circumstance, it was because we were spending less than the historical average. So this year's spending is over 30% more than the years in which we balanced the budget. I say 30% more as a percentage of our entire economy. That's how much higher it is than the years in which we balanced our budgets. That's how much and how fast government spending is growing. Unfortunately, spending remains substantially above the historical average every year in the President's budget. The President submitted a budget which borrows more, spends more, and taxes more. I can't think of a worse way to get out of an economic downturn and to start creating jobs than to continue to spend at this uncontrollable rate, to continue to borrow more and more money, and to impose higher taxes on an American economy that is already struggling. After 2018, according to the President's budget, spending increases every single year. That, Madam President, is a spending problem. That's not a revenue problem. Despite that, the administration wants to take what they call a balanced approach and to have shared sacrifice. Only in Washington, D.C. would spending more and taxing more be considered a balanced approach. Only in Washington would shared sacrifice mean taking more of taxpayers' hard-earned money to spend on the administration's priorities. And just to put a fine point on that, this week the President said, and I quote, that he'd rather be talking about things that everyone wants, like new programs, end quote. This is code for I need more of your money so that I can spend more. And, Madam President, I reject that notion. We do not need more spending here in Washington, D.C. We don't need more programs. We don't need to expand government. Government is too big already at 25% of our entire economy. Now, let's pretend for a minute that deficit reduction really was the President's priority. What's happened in the past with these, quote, balanced budget deals? Well, in 1990, the budget agreement reached by President Bush at Andrews Air Force Base was supposed to have spending cuts that outnumbered tax increases by a 2-to-1 margin. Spending was supposed to be cut by $274 billion, and taxes were going to be increased by $137 billion. What actually happened? Taxes certainly materialized, but the reality is that spending actually increased. And so in the 1990 balanced budget approach, we got increased spending and increased taxes. In 1982, under President Reagan, the exact same thing happened. And so, Madam President, I would simply say to my colleagues that this is fundamentally a debate about the size of our government. We believe that in a debt crisis, you ought to be making government smaller, not larger, not more expansive, not creating more programs. Our colleagues on the other side have a different view. But we ought to be talking about what can we do to get people in this country back to work, what can we do to get small businesses hiring. There was a Chamber of Commerce survey that came out this week that said 64% of small businesses will not add to their payrolls this year, 12% will cut jobs. Why? Because of economic uncertainty created in Washington, D.C. because we are unwilling to deal with the spending and debt issue that's in front of us and to be putting policies in place that will enable job creation and economic growth.
The senator's time has expired.
Madam President, I hope that my colleagues will work with us to reduce the size of government, not grow it. And I yield the floor.
President, how much time is left on each side?
19 minutes on the Democratic side, no time on the Republican side.
Okay, Madam President, I rise to speak about the budget and deficit issues that are facing us. The first point that is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer to the American people is how bad a default would be. The bottom line is very simple. America has never defaulted on its debt, nor should any country, particularly the greatest country in the world. Debt is a promise of expenditures that have already been made. When you raise the debt ceiling, what you're simply saying is, I am going to pay my bills. And the bottom line is that every family in America has to do that. If you own a mortgage, you can't say, after you sign the mortgage and live in the house, I'm not going to pay my mortgage unless ABC happens. If you have credit card debt and you've incurred significant debt, you can't say to the credit card company, I'm not going to pay that debt unless you do ABC. Yet some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and particularly in the House of Representatives, seem to say that. Well, it would lead to disaster. It would lead to disaster for the government. In August, America has $306 billion. This government, this federal government, has $306 billion in obligation and $172 billion in income. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, we are going to have awful choices. Do we pay the Social Security recipients and not the veterans? Do we pay the veterans and not those to whom we owe money? Do we say we'll pay veterans but not pay people who inspect food or guard our borders? The choices are awful, and choices that the American people should not have foisted on them by an irresponsible Congress that says we will not raise the debt ceiling. It will also hurt American homes, homeowners, debtors. If you're a mortgagor, your debt will go up if you have a variable rate mortgage if we don't raise the debt ceiling. You'll pay perhaps hundreds of dollars more each month. If you have credit card debt, which most Americans have, the rates are likely to go up. And overall, at a time when we need jobs and the economy is so precarious, it could send us back into a recession and perhaps even worse, according to some economists. So not raising the debt ceiling and defaulting on our debt is not an option. And Senator McConnell yesterday realized that. The substantive good news here is that the plan that Mitch McConnell offered, for all its faults, makes the likelihood of debt, of not paying our bills, of not raising the debt ceiling less likely. However, the plan has a good deal of fault to it. It seems to be a political document. It says what we care most about is two things. One, we want to throw the responsibility to the other side of raising the debt ceiling. It says that the Republican Party cares more about preserving tax breaks for the wealthy and corporate America than actually bringing down our debt. All the talk about deficit reduction, all the talk about getting a handle on our debt has been thrown to the winds, all in an effort to say that we know if we raise the debt ceiling, there'll be trouble. And Senator McConnell is well aware. He's very smart when it comes to the politics of it, that had the debt ceiling not been raised, the blame would have fallen on the party that has said that we don't care about raising the debt ceiling. Hundreds of members of the Republican Party throughout the country, scores in this Congress, both this House and the other, have said we are not going to raise the debt ceiling. Senator McConnell, realizing the consequences of doing that would fall on the party that doesn't believe it's important to do, had to act. But at the end of the day, where is the debt reduction? Where is the deficit reduction that we have heard in speech after speech after speech from the other side? The bottom line is very simple. Again, when President Obama offered a plan that would remove tax breaks from the rich, that would close corporate loopholes, the other side said, we can't tolerate that, even if it means debt reduction. And the McConnell plan shows what the other party, the other side of the aisle, really cares about: preserving tax breaks for the rich, preserving corporate loopholes, much more than reducing our deficit and bringing down our debt. Having said that, as I said, Senator McConnell has at least recognized, even if partially politically, the gravity of the situation. And he joins the other leaders here in Washington in doing that. President Obama has. That's why he put out his $4 trillion plan. Speaker Boehner has. That's why he was willing to entertain, until the rug was pulled out from under him, a big plan. Leader Reid, Leader Pelosi have constantly talked about their views and ways that we can reduce the deficit and avoid default. Madam President, there's only one person who hasn't come up with a plan, hasn't compromised, hasn't reached out to the other side in an effort to move forward. And that is the Majority Leader in the House, Mr. Cantor. He is the only one who still says, my way or the highway. Every other leader has said they are willing to make certain concessions, even though they don't like them, to avoid default. The nation, and of course this Congress, is waiting for Leader Cantor to step up to the plate in a similar way, so that maybe we can come to a compromise that actually avoids default and at the same time gets a handle on the debt and deficit problems and reduces both of those. I yield the floor.